Hello and welcome back to the Red Special Guitar Podcast. I'm John Underhill, and if you haven't been here before, we talk to people who've been inspired by Brian May's legendary Red Special Guitar. Now on that, I'd like to say that actually a massive congratulations should go out to Dr. Sir Brian Harold May CBE on his recent knighthood in the New Year's Honours list. Well done, Sir Bry, we salute you. Much deserved, and we all think that it should have been something that was done a long time ago, but well done to you for not only your involvement in music, astrophysics, and animal welfare, which is something very close to all of our hearts. And thank you so much for all of the things that you do for us. I'd also like to say thank you to all of the people that helped me run the podcast. First of all, Dan Thomas for providing me this lovely cover to my microphone. Also to my 27 patrons on Patreon, who really do help the channel keep going and make sure that we're continuing to put more content out, reaching further afield and have more technology to do things in a better way. Now, if that's something that sounds like you would be interested in, then please head over to our Patreon channel. There is a link in the description below. For as much or as little as a cup of coffee per month, you have full access to know what episodes are coming out, who we're recording with. You get to chat to me and to all the other patrons. You also get a chance to ask me questions and offer suggestions, and also ask questions of the other guests that are coming up so that you can give me suggestions for questions for them. So it's an absolutely fantastic little community that we've got, and it all really helps me to keep going and keep pushing on with the podcast. Now, without further ado, and that's enough of me rambling, I would like to introduce our next guest today. And we're very honoured to have the wonderful and legendary Mr. Tim Staffell from 1984 and Smile, who knew Brian May originally. So let's make sure you're sat comfortably, get a drink, maybe do that first, turn off all notifications on your phone, and welcome with me, Mr. Tim Staffell. Ladies and gentlemen of the Red Special Guitar Podcast, today we are absolutely honoured to welcome an original member of the band, Smile. No, it's not Brian, who we've already spoken to, or Roger, but today we meeting up with Mr. Tim Staffell, who, what an honour to have on the podcast. Welcome, Tim. How are you?
Thank you so much. I always wince when people say it's an honour, because I don't feel as though I warrant such respect. But I'm flattered nonetheless, and thank you so much. I'm very well. I've just come back from a physio session for my dodgy knee, and I'm really in good shape for a 75-year-old.
So, Tim, you said about your knee, you were in Spain recently and you had a problem, you ended up in hospital, is that?
Wow. Well, yes, we have my son Andrew, who is a fluent Spanish-speaking expat British resident of Barcelona, has been my drummer on every solo album I've made, and we are closely connected musically, both intellectually and physically. And so I spend some time in Barcelona, backwards and forwards for various reasons. And in fact, when we come onto it later, Wayward Child, my third solo album, was recorded in Barcelona. But I was there briefly before Christmas, and the poor old knee decided that it didn't want to continue existing in the configuration that it was in. So it popped out for the third time, and I found myself in a Spanish hospital being hacked about again, which I have to say, on the evidence so far, I think they've cracked it. Shall we say, euphemistically speaking, they've cracked it. It feels good now. It feels better than it did beforehand. So I've got high hopes. I'm not going to be entirely confident until another couple of months have passed, but at the moment I think we're doing okay.
Excellent. I'm glad you're on the mend. I know we arranged to speak to you before Christmas, but we obviously postponed it for very good reason, and I'm glad you're better now.
Well, the day, one of the second day I was in hospital, over there, I was supposed to go to Lille in northern France to do a personal appearance at a show called We Lille Rock You, with a load of other luminaries and a bit, and I had to end up recording a video, a hospital bed, saying, "Sorry guys, I can't make it," and I really was very, very disappointed in that, because I really wanted to go and see them, and it's kind of fun. This, I'm not sure that I warrant the interest, but fully. But what people want want me to talk to them and occasionally sing to them, I mean, I'm up for it.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Well, normally on the podcast we would ask the guest how they first heard Queen, but I think that's probably a bit of a silly question for yourself. So as you were in the band that preceded them, so I was going to ask you about your memories of meeting Roger and Brian and forming Smile, and how that went about, if that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it is. It's odd. I mean, in fact, because of what I was doing at the time, my memories of the inception of Queen and their early development are actually quite sketchy, because at the same time I was on the road doing my own thing and focusing pretty intensely on my own music at that time. So we were diverted from each other, and we never really regained that until later on. But when I was at school with Brian at Hampton, we were schoolmates. We were just school friends in the 60s. He admittedly was in the year above me. We were at a private grammar school. We were at an exclusive grammar school. Brian deserved it. I didn't. I was a hooligan. He was a swat. But nevertheless, we were friends, and it was the 60s, and I always think to myself that there was a cultural revolution in the 60s, a street level cultural revolution. It included music, art, fashion, film, and it grew out of the evolving disillusionment of the Second World War. As soon as we got to 1960, people started to relax a bit after having had 15 years of wondering whether the anxiety they'd felt during the war was going to stay or go. People started to relax, and the cultural revolution started in the 60s. And when Brian and I met, we were so fortunate in those days that we could consider being artists, musical artists, at a street level. If you see what I mean, there was a huge explosion of bands, local bands. There was the media was increasing and improving. All sorts of things were on the up. And Brian and I just happened to connect with a band that he was working with, and there were some other school friends there who worked with it. And this is 1984, which you will no doubt know of. And for 3 or 4 years, we supplemented our pocket money by playing paid gigs locally in a little covers band at where do we used to play at? Church halls, the rowing club in the Vesta rowing club in Putney. We would play. We did. God, I can't remember. We just did a lot of random gigs here and there, and had a lot of fun doing it, and got paid not very much, admittedly, but relatively a substantial amount in those days compared to what our parents begrudgingly eked out to us at the end of every week. And it was great, and of course, when we moved on to tertiary education, I went to Ealing Art School, Brian went to Imperial College, but we had a plan to continue together as connected musically, mainly because the other members of the band, because they were also moving on to tertiary education, they were geographically split up from us. So 1984 couldn't have continued. I mean, admittedly, the drummer was still local, but Brian and I had a different view of things. I think we wanted to form a power trio. I took over bass. I had been a guitar player, but I took over bass. And Brian and I then decided that he would put an ad on the notice board at the student notice board at Imperial College for a heavy drummer wanted, and Roger came to the audition. And as luck would have it, he was no slouch. And when we first saw Roger play, Brian and I thought to us, how can we strike it first shot out of the box? We just don't need to audition anybody else. We've struck gold. The metal detector has pinged on a hoard of Norman coins the first time we got it out of the box. So it was pretty fantastic. I mean, he was a heavy, flamboyant, excellent drummer, and we knew that we'd struck gold. And then for the next 18 months, Smile plied its trade in a similar eclectic collection of gigs here and there. We added some of Roger's local environment down in Truro to our field of operations. We did loads of gigs at Imperial College. We even did the Albert Hall, which was a pretty extraordinary thing. The history is actually quite well documented now, but it was a good experience. I mean, the only person who ruined it was me when I decided to move on. It's a shame. But it's easy to say, well, what would it have been like if Smile had continued? Well, I can guarantee you it would not have been as stellar as Queen was, because I'm no Freddie, and I never was, and I would only have, and even if supposing I'd stayed on as bass player, I'm afraid I was no John Deacon either. I know it sounds a bit disingenuous, but it was really good that I got out of the way. And in any case, I had a different view of things. I had an early trip to the States, which lasted for some 4 months, and I found myself almost seduced by American music. In 1970, which was just after I'd left Smile, Ry Cooder's first album was released, and that was an absolute game changer for me. I went overnight from playing from wanting to play how can I put it? I suppose stadium rock, you might say, but flamboyant English rock and roll. I went overnight almost to thinking, no, I don't want to do that anymore. I really like this. I really like this introverted bluesy style of playing. I mean, and one of the reasons for that is that it isn't so disciplined, and I think I responded to that. I mean, I do like the improvisation. I've since become a huge jazz lover, and I really do like the ability to play a song differently the next night, if you see what I mean. Yeah. I write like that as well. My songs are a vehicle for people to improvise, and Queen songs are not. Queen are very defined theatrical pieces that have clear clear segments and clear arrangements. And I probably, I mean, another reason why it was good that I left was I probably couldn't have managed that discipline, you know. And I'm not saying that that they haven't been able to extemporize on stage, because goodness knows Freddie was phenomenal at being able to present that material in a totally free and loose way. But I wouldn't have been able to do that. And as I say, the points switched over and I went on to a different track, and I've remained that way ever since, you know.
So just going back to you early or young Tim and Brian being friends, were you friends with Brian before he built the Red Special with his dad, or were you there when he was building it, or had it been completed?
Yeah, I think I came on the scene within maybe 6 months to a year of him finishing it. It's a bit difficult for me to recall. I mean, so much of it is mythological now. That it is a bit. I do remember this, that Brian and I, when we were writing, for instance, or when we were jamming together or whatever, we both had acoustic guitars. And Brian had a decent one, I had a not so decent one. But one of the things I remember that Brian did with his acoustic guitar was he had the bridge, and we were looking at an ordinary, not a jumbo, an ordinary small scale acoustic. I mean, quite a quality acoustic. I couldn't tell you the make of it, but he took the bridge, the flat bridge that is glued to the spruce top of the guitar, and where the bone bridge itself it usually sits, he took that out and he carved a selection of grooves, maybe 4 or 5 grooves, it parallel to where the bridge had been, and then he strung the guitar and he put a lighter flint under each string in a much better intonation than the plain bone saddle would have given him. So I was mightily impressed at this, because actually what it effectively meant was he had an acoustic guitar with much better intonation than your average acoustic. And I subsequently did the same on my acoustic guitar. So it was homage to Brian. But I seem to remember that he did a similar thing with the bridge on the early Red Special. He had an improved method of intonation. I don't own a Red Special, but I can't think at the moment, thinking about it, what he actually did. I think later models of the Red Special just used the standard Gibson style ABR bridge, but I don't know. I'll as soon as we finish, I'm going to check that out.
Well, the original's got 6 individual aluminium blocks at different heights, and then there's 5 grooves cut in each one, and there's a little roller he handmade on a drill as a lathe, and he used to plop the bits in. So right.
That's right. That's exactly right. And you know what I mean by lighter flint, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, from a Zippo or something. That's a properly engineered version of what he did on the acoustic guitar. Exactly. And what would happen with that, of course, was if a string broke, the rope would ping out and fly across the room because it wasn't trapped.
Yeah.
Modern, the Gibson bridge, the as you know, the bolt goes through the saddle. And in fact, if you buy a roller bridge, like a shallow roller bridge, that's almost exactly like a heavily engineered version of Brian's original bridge. Yeah.
Did you it's the Red Special podcast. We'll talk about the Red Special a little bit, and then we'll talk on other things. But did you ever get? Obviously, I'm guessing you played it and you
Yeah, I did. And
Plugged it in,
another
and
thing, I mean, the, the lower bout on the Red Special is actually really rather large. Um, I, I, I Brian's a big guy. I mean, he made it for himself. I'm a little short, fat guy, and I think that I personally would find the Red Special a little on the large side for me. But I did play it, and I do remember the fretboard, which I think he coated it in layer and layer of plastic, but it was as smooth as glass.
yeah,
And as I recall, and it was a lovely guitar to play. I mean, in fact, actually, the action is a bit low for me. I think because I these days I do quite a bit of finger picking, and if you've got low finger picking, it can be counterproductive. So my guitars, and I've got quite a few. My action is a bit. I raise the action a bit, but there's no doubt about it. I mean, the Red Special is a class act. You know, it's a very classy instrument indeed.
yeah. It's I mean, it's inspired loads of a big community now. There's about 5,000 people on an online Facebook forum all around the world, and we have a annual meetup in the UK. We had 65 people, with people coming from America, Japan, Canada, Mexico last year. It's it's a big old thing now, and yeah, it's
absolutely. I mean, I tend to think of it as a rock guitar.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's not a blues guitar. That's why I sometimes feel as I ought to be apologetic for not owning one, because I had to express solidarity with Brian by buying one of his guitars. But I kind of think, well, it just isn't my style. You know, it isn't. I probably will buy one, to be honest with you. Eventually, I probably will. I probably will out of solidarity, I think. Yeah. But right now I don't own one. And the more we talk about it, the more I'm wondering why I don't.
No, I'm guilt tripping you into buying one, Tim.
You are.
I'll give you some recommendations, because there's lots of different ones and varieties you can go for. And
I'll tell you the one that always fascinated me. Is that on good old fashioned Loverboy, the Top of the Pops version, the Top of the Pops video. I remember watching that because that's a song I really like of theirs. I remember watching that, and I remember looking at Brian, and there's a close up of Brian playing, and I remember looking at it thinking, hey, hang on a minute. Those switches are not the black slider switches that Brian put on the original Red Special. And I remember stopping the video, and it's not very good quality because it's Top of the Pops back in the day, so it's low res. And I kept looking. I thought, hang on a minute, they look like silver rocker switches. And so I then went into it. So then Google comes into play, and I went and I discover from research that is actually a Greco version of the Red Special. And I know Greco because Greco made still do, I think. I mean, along with Tokai and Bernie and Orville, they make a very, very good Les Paul copy. And so I'm very respectful of Greco. And I thought, wow, that and I know that there were early models were made by Burns, and I also know that he had a couple made, didn't he, by a luthier back in the day. But didn't Guild make a couple as well?
Guild made some as well. Yep. There's a couple of really famous Guild models. And then there's, in more recent times, Greg Fryer. He built a couple of replicas, and then
he did. Now he's Brian's guitar tech, isn't he?
He used to be. So from 1998 up until a point in the early 2000s, Greg was involved, and then Brian's moved to a chap called Andrew Guyton from Guyton Guitars.
Oh, okay.
Who now makes the Red Specials, and Pete Malandrone is Brian's tech, but. Yeah, Greg was the first person to restore the guitar in 1998.
Right.
So it's a wealth of knowledge, and Greg made a couple of variations, and then there's a few more been made over the years. But Andrew Guyton made the guitars for the Bohemian Rhapsody film, and recently made 21 working replicas of the two periods, so the 10 of one and 11 of the other period, to sell off of that. So they're the much sought after Red Specials at the moment, because he x-rayed the guitar originally, and he's copied every detail and gone to absolute town on it.
Now that's what you call nerdy, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but that's what this podcast is all about.
No, I mean, absolutely. Oh, I've got nothing. No, I mean, listen, I'm insofar as I go, I'm such a nerd myself. With everything, with all sorts of things. I love it. I love that kind of attention to detail. It's it makes life worth living.
It's the fascinating thing. It's when you start getting into the minutiae of, there's two different types of switches that were made around the same time that Brian put his slide switches in, and one's like 2 mil higher and one's 2 mil lower, and you're looking to try and find the ones that are 2 mil lower. It makes no difference because the switch is exactly the same, but the actuator is different height, and you want the right one, don't you?
Yes, you do. You do. No, absolutely.
Even if the one you want's the harder one to use. But
I mean, I suppose I apply because I haven't been as closely involved with the Red Special. I suppose I do apply the same kind of nerdiness to my guitar collection, to the varieties of guitar that I own, you know, and I'm totally on it as regards that. You know, I mean, in fact, you've made me think, well, yes, I could buy one, but am I prepared for the level of authenticity that I need to go to? It's not going to be any good me buying one from Brian May Guitars now, because it'll be an ersatz version, won't it?
Well, yeah. Well, outside of the call, I'll send you some information and some links, and we can keep in touch over what Red Special you want to get, and then we get you back on when you've got it, so you can do a review for us.
Okay, great, fantastic. Yeah. One thing I could ask you, remembering the guitar itself. One thing that I do recall, which I did very much like, is that the neck is really quite wide at the top, where the nut is. And I mean, when I buy a guitar for myself, that's often the criteria. I mean, I don't think I own a guitar that has as wide a neck as the Red Special has, but I've had several guitars along the way where I've suddenly realised that I've neglected the fact that the neck is too narrow, and I don't like it, you know. Yeah. And I move them on almost, you know, instantly. I find that so it's such a counterproductive. I've got a Gretsch over here that has such a narrow neck that I think to myself, oh my God, why did I buy that? You know. And that's got to go. That's going to go.
We've all done that though. It looks pretty. I'll buy it, and then you get it home and play it. And
I tell you, I bought this Gretsch, and it's one of the ones with the V-shaped tailpiece, which I actually didn't like. But it's a gold top, and it's got the nice Broadtron pickup on it, and it sounds really good, and it plays really well. It's got this thin neck, but I thought, no, actually, I don't own a guitar that has a Bigsby. I know what I'll do. I'll buy a Gretsch branded Bigsby, and I'll put a Gretsch branded Bigsby on it, which is what I did, and it improves the sound no end. Lovely to play, but still, every time I get down towards the machine, I'm thinking, oh no, I don't like the E chord here is a bit. I'm afraid my fingers are too close to get. Oh no, it's got to go.
I'm glad you have the same struggles as us, Tim, because it's
great, isn't it? It's
a great leveler. We all guitarists at any level have the same struggles, I think, and it's easy to think of professional musicians just pick up any instrument, but we all have our favourite thing that we go back to, and if it's not quite right, when you pick up your friend's guitar, you're like, oh, I don't like that. Or you pick up a friend's guitar and go, oh, that's amazing, I need that in mine, and then sell the guitar collection to buy the same thing.
I know. I'm currently having a sort of a revelation, about a sort of renaissance with P90 pickups. I the other week because it was so cheap, I bought a Gibson Les Paul Gold Top with P90s, and because I couldn't, and I thought, oh, it must probably a Turkey, but it isn't. It's phenomenal, and I just keep thinking to myself, how is it the guy sold it to me for that money?
Yeah.
I could double that money tomorrow. Not that I want to. I just want to play. But it's a fabulous guitar. Wonderful.
Yeah. It's a real thing, isn't it? And I think one guitar speaks to an individual and not to someone else, and it's all down to how we approach things. It's such a great subject, though.
I know.
Were you there when Brian went and bought at the Rory Gallagher gigs, when Brian went and spoke to Rory about using a treble booster in AC30? Was he? Because I'd imagine when you met him, he wasn't at that point yet where he was plugged in with his.
No, not that specific treble booster, but Brian did always use a treble booster. I think he had a Vox one that was a long elongated. Like an elongated, it was about the size of a Mars bar with a jack plug at one end and a socket at the other end, and you a battery in it. And then I think it had a switch on the side. I may be wrong, it may not have been a Vox, but it was an integral part of Brian's sound, as I recall. And he's always like that. His sound is really cutting. It cuts through everything. And I always remember, I've got to tell you this, which is not specifically related to the treble booster, but when we were recording the Amigo album and Brian came down and did his bit on them, he brought, I think that was when, did he have Pete with him then? I think he brought an AC30 with him, and he put it in the vocal booth. And we weren't recording, we were recording directly into the desk on the Amigo album, with occasionally through a pod thing. But Brian bought his AC30 and put it into the vocal booth, turned everything up full, and then played his bit. Was fantastic. And then we were messing around with noise gates, trying to get rid of the hiss that was on the top. But you've heard, obviously you know that album, but the sound is fabulous.
Yeah.
On both those tracks, it's really great.
No.
Yeah. Anyway, no, I didn't. I knew he was a fan of Rory Gallagher. Well, we all were, and I'm often reminded of the quote by Jimi Hendrix when someone asked Jimi Hendrix who the best guitarist in England was. He said Rory Gallagher, which I think is pretty amazing, really.
Yeah, very. It's a great endorsement for sure.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So
and he's a lovely guy, Rory Gallagher too. And I mean, I belong to a Facebook group called Don's Tunes, I think it's called. You may be. It's worth checking out. And he often posts a memory of Rory Gallagher with usually quite a bit of what Rory says, and it's really great and it's such a shame that he died. I mean, I'm afraid he drank himself to death, as far as I understand. I hope I'm not doing him a disservice by suggesting that, but he was so on the ball, in terms of what he wanted to do and how he went about doing it, and such a great player. Big fan.
Brian always speaks very highly of him, that they gave him the time that they would stay back and ask him, how do you make that sound? And he said it's guitar, treble booster into AC30, and that's what Brian decided needs a treble booster and AC30, and that's been the match that he's had for, since forever, as far as we know.
Yeah.
And yeah, he always says Rory was great with them, considering you relatively young kids sticking around at the end of the gig asking questions. So
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, Rory, I mean, different sound altogether. I mean, in the sense that, I mean, Rory played a Strat, and he got that crisp Strat sound through the AC30, which is what you'd expect, really. I mean, his was not a heavily overdriven sound, but odd that it should translate between them. I think because it does, because again, actually, in a way, many ways, what Rory Gallagher did was closer to what I feel,
yeah,
was my direction, and who isn't a fan of the Fender Stratocaster?
well, definitely. There are a few people, but we won't talk about them.
Well, they're wrong. They're wrong.
So,
yeah.
you've as time's gone on, you've been with the band Smile, and we've all seen. I guess you would have. You were asked to be in Bohemian Rhapsody and re-record your vocals for Doing All Right.
Yes.
And you were involved in that. How did you think that film came out? And the younger version of you, do you think he did you justice?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't need to be done justice, to be honest with you. But the way I interpreted that whole episode was that it was unexpected. I mean, I knew they were making the film. The last I heard of it was when there was some fuss with Sacha Baron Cohen, and I wasn't really paying attention. It would crop up in the media as some kind of sensationalist thing, and I'd look at it and say, oh yeah, right, okay, fine. Then one day in March 2000, whenever it was, 18, I think it was, Brian said, oh look, he said, you don't fancy coming down and having a bash at the vocal and Doing All Right? And I said, well, why? And so the explanation I got was that although Jack Roth was doing a decent enough job of it, and although they were also using some of the original Queen material as to hybridize the eventual track, they felt that it was erring too much on the Queen's sophistication side, and that what they really needed was to go back to being a bit more visceral, the same way that Smile was. And who to call but your friendly neighborhood bit of rough, me. so they called so Brian phoned me, and I think that, I mean, without joking aside, I think that was genuinely the kind of the prompt was that, if Tim comes back in and inputs in it, and because I played bass as well for it, it would take it away. It would take it away from the. It would give it a bit of personality, a bit of the looser, rougher personality, and I think that's true. And if effectively, I mean, I know that people say, oh, what was it like being in the studio with Brian and Roger again? Well, the answer is that didn't happen. I mean, I'd sang my bit, Brian was in the control room. They gave me a bass. They gave me a horrible bass, a Gibson. This Gibson, 4-string Gibson, nasty thing. Anyway, and I played the bass, and then when I heard the eventual result, I realised that again, it was a complete hybrid of the original, what I'd done in the studio, the Queen tracks, and bits and pieces. And I think, as far as I know, they even programmed the drums. But it fitted the bill. It made the right connection, I think, and I was quite happy with that. I mean, in fact, it probably sanitized the original Smile version a bit more than it should have done. But I don't. But not to a destructive degree. I mean, I think it was, and I felt that in any case, I felt the whole film was, I mean, I've worked for a lot of my life in the film business. Admittedly, I didn't work very much on feature films, but I worked on a lot of commercial films, and I know how narratives go in film, and I know what you need to do to create visual narratives. And I felt that Borat was as good as you could get in terms of biographical pick, given the raw material, given Freddie's legacy, everything about it. I thought was the guys that played the band were superb. I mean, Rami was amazing. There were some parts of it where I remember sitting in the premiere and thinking, well, that never happened. But I mean, but I could easily have been wrong. Yeah. I'm by nature cynical, and in some cases I might have thought, well, that's a gilding the lily slightly, or that's and then they've missed that bit out, But I think the important thing about Borat was that the emotional integrity was sustained from beginning to end, and I think that's and like I say, in my experience of movies, what you aim for, you maintain the emotional integrity, then artistic license is okay in that context. And I thought it was a great film. I was walking on air when I left the premiere. I thought, wow, amazing! I loved it.
No, it was a great thing. Definitely was, and it's spurred on a brand new generation of Queen fans, and
absolutely.
And I'm guessing, I'd imagine you've found more people trying to find you and follow yourself. And
well, that really is. I mean, there's the $64,000 question, because that is true, and that prompts the question of whether do I pursue that? Do I pursue that as an artist? I mean, there are a number of factors in play here. One is that I'm an old guy now, and I mean, I look at Brian and Roger and I think, God, how have you got the energy to do that? Because I don't think I could do that. I really don't think I could. But also there's a matter of dignity. I mean, I'm still a musician. I'm still writing. I'm still a musician. I still play. I seem to be hardwired to write songs. I like my songs. I think my songs are quality things. I mean, indulge me, please.
No, they are definitely. No, I was having a listen to. So you've got a couple of new songs coming out later on, and in preparation for the podcast, your wonderful daughter Kat sent over some of them. And I was having a quick listen before you jumped on, and they're great songs. So I wish I'd had more time to listen to them before speaking to you, but
well, no, thanks. Oh, I hope so. I mean, I just
Paul Stewart.
That's my. Can I call you later? Right. Sorry, that was. Now, Paul, can I just deviate here for a moment and just tell you about Paul Stewart? Now, when we were at Hampton, and Brian and I were playing in 1984, the band 1984, our bass player was Dave Dillaway, our rhythm guitarist was John Garnham, and our drummer was a guy called Richard Thompson. Unfortunately, Dave, the bass player, and Richard, the drummer, are no longer with us, but John Garnham still is. But our great heroes were the Other School Band at the time, which was called the Others. Now, the Others were a total success story. They were a bit like the Stones, a clone of the Stones. They looked the part. They were great players. Now, Paul Stewart, who I work with at the moment, was the lead vocalist of the Others, and we've come full circle after all these years. And so Paul and I play gigs together whenever we can. I mean, we're both of us a couple of old fogies, so we can't manage too much. But we have a band. We play. We enjoy it. We write together, and we still. Anyway, that's my diversion there.
That's lovely. It's great. It's funny how things work out as well, and it's lovely.
Yeah.
To get back to that full circle and come back to where you were, especially when I think a lot of us have influences when we're younger, and although there are bigger influences maybe later on in life, it's often the ones that you remember the most, the ones that the first time the person that made you pick up a guitar, or the people you wanted to be like, or
absolutely. I mean, Brian knows Paul very well, and the last thing Brian said to me just before Christmas was, "I must get to see you and Paul play." Now, I mean, I doubt whether that will ever occur, but it's nice that he would express that interest, that desire. I mean, who knows? It may happen. But my personal musical endeavors are really independent of Paul. I mean, I have two. There are two pathways. One is my solo work, which is not really bluesy. It's more soul-y, jazzy pop. And the other one is the gigs I do with Paul, which are really quite bluesy, but it's just the way it is. I just enjoy it,
But as long as you enjoy it, that's got to be the main thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, just going back, Tim, so you've decided, you've been to America, you've come back, I'm paraphrasing now, I'm probably going to mess up the timeline. You've decided that you don't want to carry on with Smile anymore. You've gone, it's all right, guys, here's Freddie Mercury. You've
No, go on, Freddie. No, go in there. Go on. No, they'll love you. They will. No, that's ridiculous.
The Queen have gone off to do something, and you've gone off on your own path. Where do you go next? What's your next step? Because
my next step was a really weird one, because the early 70s, I was beginning to understand. I was beginning to understand what we all euphemistically call the groove. It's something that permeates jazz, and it permeates funk, and it permeates a lot of blues, and in my opinion, it doesn't permeate enough rock. There's a lot of rock that is rhythmically not to my taste, and that's the best I can say about it. Especially some of the more extreme metal incarnations I find difficult personally, and I find them a bit anyway. So when I joined Morgan was the other end of the spectrum altogether. Morgan is a prog rock group, and Malone Morris, the drummer, was actually he did understand the groove. A lot of the material that Morgan Fisher was writing was being prompted by people like Bartok and Stravinsky. So it was rhythmically complex, difficult to play, and the groove was not the crucial element of it at all. But one of the reasons I joined Morgan was because I did have a certain leeway to do my own songs as well. And on the two Morgan albums, there are elements of my own input which I'm very happy with. In fact, I'm very proud of the two Morgan albums, even though they are what I would consider to be a bit off message to my eventual direction. But what was the great thing about Morgan was that I got the chance to be a librettist. Morgan used to write this material, send it over to me, and I'd be listening to this complex, rhythmic, aharmonic stuff, and trying to put lyrics and melodies to it. And I sometimes think that was the absolutely the best training for lyric writing that of anything I could ever imagine. And I think the reason for that was because in the midst of all this complex rhythmic exercising, I found myself discovering ways that I could use colloquial phrases to inhabit a melody. And that to me has been the single most important feature of my lyric writing. It is that you have to understand the way that lyric meter sits within a melodic meter. There are lots of lyrics I listen to, and they don't do that. They go their own way. The meter of the lyric is not consonant with the meter of the melody, and that's fine. And people have their own way of doing things. But for me, I like to try and inhabit the melody of a song with a comfortable colloquial phrase that makes sense, means something, and fits in with the general narrative of the actual song itself. It's a crazy thing to say, and it maybe doesn't need saying. It's a pedantic way of explaining how someone writes lyrics. But my time in Morgan was like a degree in how to write lyrics. And it was, and as I say, very proud of those albums. I'm still good friends with Morgan Fisher. In fact, I saw him in Tokyo a couple of years ago. We had dinner, and it was really great because he's lived there for 20 years or more. Well, maybe even more than 40 years, perhaps. But no, and great keyboard player. Really clever guy. But yeah. So that was what happened after I left Smile. And of course, at that time, the inception of Freddie into Queen was not as depicted in the movie. That's artistic license. That's narrative license. Yeah. But the point is, we all knew each other anyway. I mean, when I went on to tertiary education, I went to Ealing College, and who should I meet but Freddie? And we were good mates. We had a parallel musical interest. We evolved. Our own musical sensibilities evolved parallel pretty much all through college, until I became a deviant and went off somewhere else. And Freddie was still on message with what Smile were doing. And it was, and although I think the guys were initially they had a bit of trepidation about whether or not they thought Freddie was the guy for them. Well, that misconception didn't last for long, thank God. Yeah. And and not only that, but Freddie had this confidence. Freddie had this confidence that was a pretty amazing thing. I mean, he wasn't that confident in an academic situation at college, but he kind of, it was developing as he went, and you knew, and he used to camp it up a bit and say, "Someday, darling, I'm going to be a star." And most of the people in the group would say, "Yeah, sure you are, Freddie." But kind of he did that. That was a core value. That confidence with him was a core value, and I might even have made light of it at the time and thought, "Oh yeah, that's pretty superficial, isn't it?" But he was so right. He was so right. And what he understood, what Freddie understood was, and which it took me until I was about 70 to understand, was that your job as a musician is to entertain. It's not to educate. And I'm afraid I spent a lot of my life thinking, "Oh yes, but we've got to, purism, And Freddie knew about entertainment early on, and he was able to turn his personality and his presence into being, the British entertainer of the last century, probably.
Yeah, definitely. And as you progressed on, Tim, and you left and you went to played with Morgan, and as you've gone on for the rest of your career to do some other things, which we'll come on to, have you always kept in touch? Not necessarily kept in touch with the members, but have you followed Queen's trajectory, or have you sort of just known about it? And
probably not as closely as one might think. It's been, I mean, my wife and my kids have probably followed the trajectory closer than I have, in the sense that we have a number of Queen. I don't have all of Queen's albums. We have a number of their albums here, and I've got all of Brian's albums. And I think the days when we were closest to following Queen was in the days when my kids were young, which would have been the 80s. And we would play Queen material in the car a lot, and you kind of you drift in and out of connections with things, and I haven't really apart from anything else, since they stopped making new material, I've slightly gone off the boil a bit, because actually I would love to hear some new material. I mean, I do find myself playing some of my favorite old songs, but I wish they would do some new stuff. Brian, I think it was Roger, said that they started to write some new stuff down in Montreux, but then they'd let it ride, and nothing came of it. And I think that's a bit of a shame. I went to see Roger's tour last. It must be a year ago.
Getting close, isn't it?
Getting close to a year ago. We saw the last night of the tour at the O2 at Shepherd's Bush. That was great. I mean, and Brian came on there, and I just kept thinking, oh, come on, I want some new material, But it's fine. It's fine. It's. I mean, because on the other hand, you might think to yourself, well, why would they need to? Why would they need to? That they are a legacy act with, and people, as you quite rightly said, the movie has opened up a whole new spectrum of fans. So did We Will Rock You. So did the musical.
Yeah,
and the music's still going.
Yep.
So maybe new material is a luxury they don't want to be able to afford.
Yeah. It's an interesting one for sure.
I'd still like to hear some though.
Yeah.
I kind of like to. Maybe I'd quite like to maybe write with Brian.
Yeah.
I'd like to, because in the old days, Brian and I were on the same wavelength. Step on Me and Doing All Right are pretty good songs.
Yeah, very good. I'd say it's worth a phone call or an email.
Yes. Am I confident enough?
You just got to do it, Tim, for sure. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. You got to put. Well, definitely. I think you might. Yeah. You never know. You don't know unless you ask, do you? That's something that I've.
No, it's true. I like I said earlier. I mean, one of the things that's bothered me all the way through, which has kept me a little bit at arm's length, is that I've been terrified. Well, terrified's a bit strong, but I've been very conscious of the fact that in terms of reflected glory, if I overstep the mark too much, it could be a very undignified thing indeed. And I really didn't want to do that. I didn't want to butt my head in where it wasn't needed and wasn't wanted. You know, I appreciate that they would have probably have been very polite and respected my legacy rights, if you like, but still I didn't want to do that because you know, every successful band in the world has got the guy who got chucked out just before they got famous. So, you know, what sets me apart? I mean,
maybe, well, I don't know. There's maybe a few things you could look at slightly differently, but I get why your headspace is on that.
It's a bit of a devil's advocate thing, really, for me saying that, because I've always been a bit nervous about it. You know, I remember once it was brought home to me. It was in the late 80s, mid 80s. It was in the mid 80s, and I was working on a commercial. For Burger King, and the director of the commercial was David Mallet. Now, David Mallet directed. I can't remember now. What's the Queen video where Freddie is wearing the red costume with the eyes? What's that?
I can see the photo in my head. I really should know this.
Yeah, that was directed by David Mallet as well, and to be honest, I found David Mallet very, very difficult to work with. And I knew who he was, and I knew, but what kept going through my mind was, you know, oh dear me, what am I reduced to? I'm reduced to dealing with this crap, you know. So it was kind of, and at that point I thought, you know, maybe I should never ever mention it again anywhere, that, you know, that I was involved. You know, I don't want the humiliation of feeling so inferior.
I can see. I think from all of our perspective, you were there at the beginning, and you like the catalyst to get them going. And
yes, I know that's, yeah. I mean,
but I can well imagine at certain times you'd have looked at it, especially in that situation, and just thought, "Oh, what's going on?"
Yeah, because people say to me, you know, well, I mean, I've had people say to me, you know, nudge me and say, "Oh, there's a decision you regret, isn't it?" And I mean, actually, that's not so, because Queen didn't exist when I left, and I had no. And I had no inclination that they were going to reach the heights that they did. Yeah. And even if I had, it probably wouldn't have made any difference to my views, because my views were based on something different altogether, yeah. Which was, you know, where I personally wanted to go.
Yep.
And so. When they did become famous, by God, yes, I was envious. When it all kicked off, yeah, I was envious. Who wouldn't be? But I like to say that I was never destructively jealous. Yeah. You know, I was green. I was emerald green with envy, but I hope it never translated into bitterness and jealousy, and it never did. I mean, I may have been lying around drunk at a party in some instances, and been in a conversation where I might have said, "Bastards, they left me behind." but I was never seriously anything other than supportive, you know.
Definitely allowed that, though. The drunken claim. We'll let you off that one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I look back on what I've done personally, and I've had fun. I've had a lot of fun. The film business was massive fun. You know, I've been a model maker, massive fun. I was, you know, chief model maker on Tommy the Tank Engine. almost best job ever in the world, playing with big toy trains. What? Please, and then I had my own business. I was in partnership, and we made models and sets, and we animated things, and I sculpted, and I made things, and I've just had such a great hands-on experience, and although even coming back to music, I mean, after I came back to music, I then took a job as a university lecturer for 10 years doing theatre design, and I got immersed in theatre and musicals, and I mean, that in itself was another whole facet of this of the career that I've had, and I cannot honestly say that I'm disappointed comparatively in what I've done in comparison to what Queen have done. Yeah. I'm just deadly jealous about the money.
It's a very honest answer to a difficult question.
But one of these days, when I win the lottery, it will all be all right.
Well, I think as well, money's one thing, and I know it makes lots of things easier, but I think it doesn't bring you happiness really, and it helps you remove certain issues and be able to answer certain questions, but you still get problems and you get other problems, and I think
I actually agree. I don't know how the guys. I mean, I assume that they do have tensions and well, I mean, I know that I've spoken to Brian. I know that he's had anxiety. He's had quite severe anxieties over the years. I don't know about Roger. I mean, Roger strikes me as possibly being a bit more of a hedonist than Brian. And although I socialised with Roger not for a long time now, but we get on fine. I mean, but I suspect that there's a certain level of income that one can aspire to, which doesn't carry with it the massive responsibilities that enormous incomes do.
Yeah.
That removes the obstacles that cause you anxiety without supplanting it with others that create greater anxieties.
Yeah.
I'm just below that level.
Well, yeah, and it's just interesting listening you talk about it and being really open and candid with it, Tim. It's really refreshing to hear someone be so honest. And I was going to ask you about your career in film and career in model making, and knowing you worked on Thomas the Tank Engine, and what a fantastic thing to have been able to do in your life as well, and look back on and think you'd played a part in something that not only is iconic, but has brought joy to so many children for many generations. And I often think if people don't point those things out to people, that we all don't look at what we've done as, I'm just myself. I haven't done anything special. I'm just me. And you sometimes need someone to go, actually, that thing you did has changed the lives of a whole generation of young people in this country. That don't forget that, because that's a massive thing to have done.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, this whole business about there are two things about Tommy the Tank Engine, and especially those years. I think one is that my role as supervisor was much less hands-on than a lot of the top quality guys that were working on that project. I mean, I'm actually not the model maker that most of them were. Most of them are near genius people with craft skills that you wouldn't believe. I'm a competent sculptor, and I did sculpt most of the faces for the initial series and all of the little characters, the human characters. So that was most of my practical input. the rest of my, and a certain amount of the set building with the slopes and the buildings and the grass and that. But my skills pale to insignificance against some of the guys that were working on it. I was just there in a supervisory capacity most of the time. I said that I probably did pretty well, and in situations like that, I'm probably quite good at finding my way through to the most efficient way of doing something. Even if I'm not that good at doing it myself, I can facilitate things by, well, possibly by the employment of useful rhetoric and diplomacy.
But that's a skill in itself, and without people doing that, you can't have these inspirational model makers doing what they're doing, because they can't communicate with the level above, and it's a.
I hope that I've been that kind of notional interpreter, in situations like that. The other thing about those years, which of course is probably not so joyful in terms, or not so positive, is that in those days we were working as freelancers, especially in the TV special effects business, which for me lasted from about 1978 right the way up to almost 2000. We were working as freelancers. That is to say that our employment was not secure. I mean, we worked on contracts. Once you finished one job, you were on to the next. If you were lucky, there was no gap. It's a bit like builders not turning up because they've gone on to the next job so that they can maintain a continuity. It was quite difficult to attain continuity of employment in those days. And so what you tended to do as a result was take on everything and anything that was offered to you. You'd work all weekend, you'd work late nights, you'd work as much as you possibly could, because you couldn't afford to have 3 weeks off when two jobs didn't dovetail.
Yeah.
And the result of that was that I feel that it's arguable that I neglected my young family in terms of the dad who wasn't there. And sometimes when we have words, my wife flags that up. and I don't resent her for doing that. I think she's got a serious point. But I think that's a bit of a syndrome with a lot of people that work freelance. I don't think I was on my own at all. And I regret it, but in order for us to maintain a degree of financial security through our lives, it was necessary, and
yeah.
But it still makes me wince from time to time.
Well, again, what a great answer, because it's an honest, real answer, and it's a sign of the times, and things have changed for sure. I'd say those sorts of things have improved. I've got a brother-in-law who's a stuntman, and he works job to job, and he gets a contract for 2 weeks while they work on something. Then he might not get another job for 3 months, and so
I know that's the fear.
He has to take the work when he can.
We used to say, or used to jokingly to each other, "That's it, the job's finished. I'll never work again."
Yeah,
but what it did do though, was it promoted the idea that the best thing you can do in a creative career is to learn how to network. Because that's what you need, the contacts. You have got to get as many contacts as possible, and you've got to keep contact with your contacts. You've got to phone them up when you're not working. You've got to pester. I mean, it's the same with getting gigs.
Yeah,
networking in the music business, even at the reduced level that I do it on. In fact, I'm going to phone up Swanage Blues Festival in a minute and try and get on that again this year, because we need gigs.
Yeah. No, it's a great skill to have, and I think it's those unforeseen bits of work that happen that make people successful or that enable you to continue to work, and it's the hidden bits that you don't see on the outside that, you know, whether it's a film or you're making a model for something, or you're making I don't know, a song, or you're writing a song, or you're even trying to get guests on a podcast. There's bits and pieces of work that go on behind the scenes to get to the point of delivery that people aren't aware of, and it's those things that are the hard bits that if you can keep your focus and keep going on, then you reap the rewards later on. But no, it's just nice that you're so honest. It's great. Not that I've had people that aren't. It's just refreshing to speak to someone who's taken a look back and is aware of the situation.
But I also think, you know, in that respect, I tend to think that in order to maintain one's integrity, and it's always been important that I do, your greatest weapon is truth, because there's no point in conning yourself. Well, you know, maybe some people's success is predicated on the fact that they have maintained an illusory self-belief, maybe. But I'm afraid with me, I tend to use truth as a weapon. You know, because if I tell the truth, I can't feel guilty, even if it means that I drop myself in it. I still can't feel guilty, and to me, guilt is the most horrible feeling. You know, I mean, yeah, there are times when I've done something that I look back on and I thought, God, I wish I hadn't done that. That was unfair, and I'm afraid I find the feelings of guilt, you know, in a situation like that where maybe you don't have a choice. So really, when I'm trying to talk about the past, especially the past in a situation that could potentially be misinterpreted, it's important for me to use the truth to weaponize the truth, because that way I can't be accused of anything. I can't be accused of dishonesty. I can't be accused of maliciousness. Can't be accused of bitterness. You know, and it's important that in my situation as this kind of legacy character that I'm not accused of any of that. You know.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think you're doing a great job. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Moving on to more recent times, you've decided, or not decided, that sounds like you weren't doing it, but you've come back into music a bit more. You've talked about playing live gigs, and you've got some new songs coming out and a new song out in February. So if we get our timings right, we should be launching the podcast around the new songs coming out.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Talk us through where you are with that and what that process has been like. And
okay, well, just as a preamble to that, a word or two about the Amigo and the two late albums. The reason the Amigo album came out, or the reason I decided to make the Amigo album, was because I had a bunch of songs dating back for the 30-year period when I hadn't been actively recording, although I had been playing in little scratch bands and doing, you know, amateur bits and pieces here and there. But the Amigo was my first serious return to recorded music and songwriting. I had to add some modern songs to the legacy stuff, songs like Stray, Earth, Doing All Right. God, I can't remember Why Can't We Be Free? There's a bunch of songs on that first album that were old, that predate the 70s, that I revisited for the Amigo album, and then there were another bunch of songs that were written especially for it. Once we released that, it kind of opened the floodgates for me, and I thought, well, I'm just going to keep writing, and it triggered me writing again, basically. And so a few years after that, I'd written all the stuff for Too Late, and we were able to release Too Late at around the same time that Bo Rap came out, even actually though it had been in the can for some time. But around about the time we released that, I also bumped into Paul Stewart again and the guys from the Others, and their guitar player had left. Peter Hamilton, who was actually a contemporary of Brian's. One could arguably say there isn't a body of opinion that arguably says that Brian was very influenced by Peter Hamilton. Now, I don't know, maybe that's true. Or I've just got to say to Kat, no, I'm not finished. And don't feel pressured, because I'm not feeling pressured. So I met the guys in from the Others who had just lost their guitar player, and they said, "Well, look, do you want to play guitar?" And so I said, "Yeah, okay, let's do it." And so they had called them, they had reformed as the Others. Doing legacy gigs, doing revisiting old things, and so they changed their name. We changed our name since I joined to Big Steam, so we were now called Big Steam, and we made an EP, I think, and we did some gigs. We did a couple of tours of Croatia, short tours of Croatia. We played in France a few times, and then as always, it becomes quite difficult to keep a 5-piece band on the road financially, with, especially if the gigs are starting to be in the south of France or mid France or Croatia. It's starting to get expensive. So a couple of the members just said, "Oh, I can't be trudging through the rain and the snow to play at wherever for 100 quid. I'm not doing this anymore." So I was left with Paul Stewart, and so Paul and I said, "Well, let's just carry on as a duo, because the running costs are nothing like what they are for a band. I don't mind putting money into it. I don't mind subsidizing it. He didn't mind subsidizing it. So we carried on as a duo, and then from time to time, we would then buy a rhythm section in and use a rhythm section, so we'd have an electric band again, and that's where it sits at the moment.
Yeah.
But having said that, and we do some of my material with the Paul Stewart incarnation, but the other side of my coin is me as a solo artist, and the Wayward Child album, which is a lyric. I mean, it's a bit of a double entendre, because arguably I'm the wayward child from the Queen family, who, I'm the prodigal son who buggered off and returned 50 years later broke. No. No, the Wayward Child is a lyric on one of the songs, and it actually the Wayward Child lyric refers to time. Time is a wayward child, but it seemed there's an ambiguity there that kind of just fits the situation. So it represents my current songwriting, which as I think I know what genre it's in, but I'm not sure. I think I have to leave it to everybody else to tell me what kind of genre it sits in. Or if it doesn't sit in any genre, then it means that it's original, and I can live with that as well.
Yeah.
I used to say I was heavily influenced by Steely Dan, and it may be that on Amigo and Too Late there's evidence of that, but I think less so now. I think I'm slipping into a kind of a soul-y groove. And actually, what's happening is I'm becoming more confident that I can write songs where I'm less concerned about the structure. Although heavens above, I am concerned about song structure, but I'm more concerned about real lyrics. And in fact, a lot of the stuff on Wayward Child is personal, and I never used to write personal lyrics until maybe midway through Too Late, and then it became important for me to actually put down a couple of statements that indicate how I feel about my own life. I'd not done that before. I'd written little stories, and little political. I mean, The Land, for instance, on Amigo is an eco hymn, if you like. I sometimes think I should re-release that, because it's all about the fact that it's about global warming, it's about pollution, it's about the ecosystem. It's a plea for sanity, and it would be quite topical now. But in the middle of Too Late, I started to write songs about my emotional life, and I think that's carried on into Wayward Child. There's one song called Tomorrow Is Another Day on Wayward Child, which is actually so painful. It's so painful that sometimes when I play it, I wonder whether I'm embarrassing people. The lyrics are not necessarily, they're not. It's not hot story lyrics or anything. It's just very heartfelt for me, and it's very true. It's a true story. It's a very true story, and it's a plea. It's kind of a plea. It's a plea from me myself to accept the truth of my situation. Maybe that's just it. It's quite, and it's a bit maudlin as well. But I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't admit things like that. I don't know. I sometimes wonder whether my material is even though it's not all personal. I sometimes wonder whether it's a little bit. It tends to exclude audience rather than include audiences, because that's the one thing I used to think Freddie and Queen was that, geez, how the hell are they so good at including audiences in with their presence? Because Freddie would come out on stage, the band would come out on stage, and they just enfold the audience in their whole presence. And I'm thinking, I'm not doing that. I'm effectively telling people it's a miserable bloody world, and we're all trying to do this. So maybe that's it.
Well, you've definitely sold it to everyone listening. So if we want to go and find that, Tim, when's it coming out, and where will we be able to get hold of it, and how are you release? Is it just digital release, or are you doing a?
I'm not going to. I mean, the other two albums have been CDs and digital, but that's really rather pointless. And since I keep stubbing my toe on the boxes of CDs under my bed that are left over, I think the time has come to look at not doing CDs, at least not until it maybe becomes important to to have some product, but at
Yeah.
the moment it's not. And we're going to, at the moment, the plan is to drop the first single, which is called "The Sinner," on or around February the 17th.
Okay.
And then and so that will appear on Spotify and on all digital platforms. And then I think a single a month, or approximately a single a month for about 4 months. And then early summer, I think what we'll do is we'll drop the whole album. And then we may then release singles after the album's dropped, although you might say, well, why are you doing that? But the reason for that is I think that if we release singles separately, it gives the opportunity to focus on them for sync and for anything else that might they might be useful for. So, I mean, generally, by the summer, the album will be available on Spotify, and we're going to lead up to it with a series of singles.
Ideal. And the best way to, obviously, we can go and look for your name, Tim Staffell, on Spotify, but I know you've got a very active Instagram account as well, where you're posting up.
And been behaving very stupidly on TikTok for a number of weeks now, and that's going to continue. But I love it. I love it, and I should actually say, yeah, the Amigo and Too Late are available on Spotify and digital platforms, but there is also an album called How High that I recorded with Paul Stewart. And there's a number of my songs on there that I'm particularly proud of as well. So and there's some Paul Stewart, there's some great Paul Stewart stuff on there as well, and a selection of covers, blues covers. But the whole canon of my writing does include that album too. So I just stress to everybody, have a listen. I'm on Bandcamp. You can download on Bandcamp as well. You can actually still buy CDs on Bandcamp, and if you want to, you can buy T-shirts. I've got a deal with Printify. Is it Printful? Whereby you can still buy Smile T-shirts. You can buy a Humpy Bong T-shirt if you want to, but you can also buy T-shirts that illustrate have the cover designs of Too Late and Amigo on. And there's a lot of legacy stuff on. I use that word a lot, don't I? There's a lot of legacy tracks on there that predate the Amigo album, that go back into the past, which are nevertheless quite interesting. There's actually a Humpy Bong track on there. There's some stuff from a band I had in the 70s called Tailfeather. There's quite a bit of stuff for people that might be interested, and I think the majority of it is pretty good.
Definitely. And the bits I've listened to from Wayward Child have been, I mean, I literally, unfortunately, only had about 10 minutes to listen to them, but I was enjoying them until your face popped up on Zoom, and I think I must answer that. That's important.
No worries. No, well, I do hope you enjoy it. I mean, like I say, I don't know where it sits in the vast scheme of things. I enjoyed recording it. I was very, very grateful and impressed with the production team of Oscar. Oh, Oscar? What's your second name? Oh, well, you know who I mean. I love you dearly. And Jason, who were the production team on the album in Barcelona, and the wonderful music I worked with. It actually liberated me from my preconceptions about what I could do, into allowing me to make the album Wayward Child, which I think is somewhat of a departure. I think it's a little more sophisticated than I'd previously been involved with, but I put that down to Oscar telling me that that's where I should be going, and at that moment in time, I think I agree.
No, I'm looking forward to getting some more time to listen to the rest of them, Tim, and to listen to the singles as they come out across this year, and then finally download and listen to the album.
Right.
It's great to to talk to you about where everything started and then where it's gone and how you changed your thoughts and learned and where you've got to now and how it's inspired you from your own perspective and point of view of the story or your part in the story. So it's great to see that path, and that it's not been a linear thing for you, and it's been up and down, but you've ended up where you are, and you're doing good things.
Well, I do hope that. I've always been a bit sensitive about the slight grasshopper aspect of my brain. Well, in terms of running a linear narrative, and I hope I haven't confused you or confused anybody about the directness of the narrative. I hope it's made sense.
Definitely.
I hope I've covered everything that is significant about it.
I think you've done a great job, and it's been a pleasure talking to you tonight.
It's been great to talk to you as well.
Thank you.
I think you asked a lot of, if I may say so, this has been one of the most enjoyable interview stroke podcasts I've ever had. If you've let me waffle on, and I think I've had one or two insights during the course of this that I've not been aware of having in past interviews, and I'm hoping that'll inform the overall picture to a better degree than I've been able to do in the past.
It's I find letting guests talk and asking the odd question and trying to steer things, you get the best out of people, because if no one wants to hear me, well, I know where I stand in all of this. But my role is to try and help you remember things from the past, or to put...
I think it worked really well. Yeah.
No, thank you. Tim, it's been fantastic. I'm going to say goodbye, but please stay on. And thank you so much for being on the Red Special Guitar podcast, Tim. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
It's been a lot of fun, actually. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
And keep safe, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon when you've got your brand new Brian May Red Special.
Oh, absolutely. Happy New Year to everybody. And let's go forwards towards the summer with the renewed optimism
and some new music in the summer that we can all listen to.
Indeed.
Thanks, Tim. Keep safe.
Bye for now.
And what a wonderful episode that was with Tim. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast. It's a real treat for us all, and to hear some of those stories from the early days of Brian and the Red Special, and then hear you be so candid about life and your own experiences and some of the questions people have asked you and where you feel you fit into all of this was absolutely amazing. I really, really feel honoured that you felt that you could share that with me, and it was an absolutely fantastic discussion that we had. Hopefully everyone watching will agree. Now, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then I'd really like to think that you would consider subscribing and liking the channel. It really helps the channel grow, and there's no reason not to if you've enjoyed it. Also, please make sure you check out our Patreon. We also have a website where you can check out merch, and there are some upcoming events in the recent future. In March in 2023, in the Lingalonga Lounge in Phoenix, Arizona, is the US Red Special Meetup hosted by Luke Holwerder, and it's well worth going over to see if you've never been to one and you're in that part of the world at that point. Absolutely fantastic group of people. You get to meet Mr. Andrek Hernandez, who helps edit this podcast, and he is an absolute legend, so make sure you go and meet him if for nothing else, and also make sure you follow all of his social media accounts. And talking of social media, you may have seen, if you are on TikTok, that the Red Special Guitar podcast has now entered the world of TikTok, and we're really excited to see where that can go. We hope you can go and follow us over there and see what we're posting up. And make sure you follow us on Facebook and Instagram as well. And also go and check out the website where you can see lots of merch that's coming up for sale, and also any details on the UK Red Special Guitar Meetup, which is the most emailed thing. And please keep your eyes out for new podcast episodes coming really soon. We're hoping to get a few more out a bit quicker this time and in 2023, and do a few other videos. And as you can see, we're starting to put something together here. It's not quite finished yet, but keep watching and we'll keep updating, and hopefully you will enjoy what the Red Special Guitar Podcast has to bring in 2023. That's enough rambling from me. You stay safe, and I'll catch you in the next one.